Colorado?
We cannot. It's incredibly dry here. My interest is I'm a gardener who works at 8,000 feet, so up in the mountains. And I'm coming to Scotland in September for a month. And I'm just extremely interested in your culture and your plants and your materials and your landscape. So I'm very much about wanting to learn more about what you have that I don't have.
Oh, well, that is amazing. Well, you are totally welcome. And as is everybody else, it's lovely to have so many people here today. And our own marvelous Helen Rushton is going to talk to us about her love of snowdrops today. So I hope you've all got a drink and a snack with you. I've got a snowball as my snack, which is a very naughty little, very sweet treat. But I felt that I could have one today because we are talking all things snowdroppy. So please enjoy Helen's talk, which she will begin in a second. And then at the end, hopefully there'll be a little bit of time for questions. So Helen, are you all right to take over the mantle and share your screen?
Yep, certainly I will do, yeah.
Lovely. I will mute myself so nobody can hear me eating my snowball.
So hopefully everyone can see that. So I thought I'd take a tongue-in-cheek sort of look at snowdrops. I'll start off with how we actually arrived in Scotland, how we discovered snowdrops, because I didn't always knew that snowdrops existed. And I'll take you through sort of the different species of snowdrops, some of the snowdrops that do well here in the garden and some unusual ones that you might like to have a go at growing yourself. And then some obviously tongue-in-cheek sort of look at some of the prices that have been hitting the headlines recently for snowdrops. So, yeah. There we go. So in the beginning, literally, this was our house when we moved to Aberdeenshire in 1991. As you can see, it's a derelict croft house. We basically had nothing here. Just off to the picture to the left-hand side was a couple of common ash trees, but literally there was no hedging, no trees. It was just grass up to the front door and surrounding it. So everything that we've put in the garden, we've done ourselves. And in the summer of 1991, we actually started renovating it, but it actually got quite a bit worse before it got any better. As you can see, there was actually 2 roofs on the croft house that we needed to remove, which was quite an eye-opener for our neighbours because their house is called Heathery Braes and they'd always wondered why it was called Heathery Braes because there's no heather anywhere around here. But when we took the tin roof off, we actually discovered that underneath there was about a foot of heather thatch. So that must have been what they traditionally used for roofing the houses around here. But of course, a lot of them had been derelict and lost. So ours was sort of the last one to get renovated. So it took us a long time. It took us 2 years before we actually moved in. And now this is actually what the house looks like now. So it's an awful lot tidier. The only thing that's different to today, this is sort of 2020. What's different to today is we've lost those 2 topiary peacocks at the front of the house. One winter they just killed off and they never grew back again. And it's probably a good thing really, because at the open garden days, the amount of people that sort of say, oh, I really like your snails. And I'm like, well, they're supposed to be peacocks. But anyway, so that's what the house looks like now. So I thought I'll give you a quick run through on what actually is a snowdrop, although a lot of you might actually, know already. So these are some of the snowdrops that we have in the garden. You can see huge variety of them. So what it actually is a snowdrop? So they're all in the genus Galanthus, as opposed to the snowflakes, which are leucogyms. So they're all Galanthus. They're perennial, so they come back year after year. They're herbaceous, so they die down under the ground into the bulb to come back up next year. There's 22 species known at the moment, and there's 3 naturally occurring hybrids. And then there's an unknown number of varieties. We know there's at least 2,500. There's probably an awful lot more. And each year there's a new book that comes out that will illustrate more and more. But yeah, it's impossible to know exactly how many there are. And new ones are bred every year, new ones are found every year. So they range from the tiny little alpine nivalis, that's sort of 3 or 4 centimeters, right up to 45 centimeters tall. Although today I was actually sent in the post very kindly a snowdrop called Lambrook's Tall from Lambrook Garden. And it's actually, I know some of it might have been under the ground, but it measures sort of 2 foot long. So it's going to be interesting how tall it actually grows to next year when it comes up. So snowdrops, they can be single, which is what everybody sort of probably thinks about snowdrops. Then you have double ones, then you have poplariforms, which are basically the inner and outer segments are the same length. And if you turn them upside down, they look a bit like a wine goblet shape. And snowdrop people like their unusual names. So we've got Pterugiform, and I don't actually know whether it's Perugiform or Pterugiform that you pronounce it, but they basically look like the roof of a Chinese pagoda. So they flare outwards. Then you get spiky ones and all sorts of combinations, and they vary from pure white to completely green, and then there's also yellow ones in between. And they've got all sorts of common names depending on where they're grown and they occur. I think some of them are quite nice, like sort of February Fair Maid and Dingle Dangle. So that's quite a nice name, really. So this is what a snowdrop looks like. The vast majority conform to this shape. So you've got 3 inner segments, and they're surrounded by 3 outer segments. Some people call them petals, some call them tepals, but I just got used to using the term segments. And they're all held together at the top by an ovary if it's a single plant. If it's a double, they actually lose the ability to reproduce. So that's just an extension of the pedestal, which is the stem that the connector of the flower to the stem. The stem is called a scape. And at the top of the scape, you'll have a spathe, which is like an adapted leaf, which envelops the flower. So when it's pushing up through the frozen ground, the flower doesn't get damaged. And then as soon as the flower's out in the open air, that spathe will peel away. Sometimes it'll split, sometimes it'll just stay intact. And then you'll have a variety of different leaves. Some snowdrops will come up and flower first and they won't have any leaves, and then the leaves will come along afterwards, and some do it the other way around. So is it native to the UK? Now, I know snowdrops have been on the news a lot recently and in magazines and generally on social media. So I think everybody knows now that it's not actually native to the UK. But nobody actually knows a definitive date of when they actually arrived here. It's known to have popped up and been named in a herbal book in about 1585. So that's perhaps the earliest record, although it might have come over before that. Some even say that the Romans may have brought them over from Europe with them, but no one's not exactly sure. But one thing's for sure is that they're now totally naturalized across the UK. I don't actually know how far they go up into the Scottish Islands, or even if I don't know if they're on the Isle of Man or are they on the Isle of Wight. I'm not quite sure how far they've spread off the mainland, but they're certainly all over mainland UK. And now they're actually known to be naturalizing over in America, in the northern states of America, and into Canada. Obviously, they've been taken over with settlers, perhaps. Or today, lots of collectors, and they are a plant that spreads really easily by seed. You don't tend to see them down in New Zealand and Australia because they're obviously very strict on the importation of plants. But I think probably they are starting to appear down there because collectors are taking them over there. So if it's not native to the UK, where does it actually come from? So here's a nice little map, which is actually now out of date. Somebody sent it to me in about 2012, I think. So yeah, but you can see the green part, which is nivalis, they're the most widespread, and then they intersect and overlap with quite a lot of the other species, and that's where these natural hybrids come from. So when you're going over to the Black Sea and around the coast and Turkey and things, that's where you'll quite often see lots of unusual snowdrops that haven't been named, and you'll find a lot of collectors will go out there to bring some new snowdrops back as well. So quite widespread, right the way from France, right the way over to Russia, in one species or another. So I'll just mention a little bit about CITES here before we start. So I think it was about, let me just check my notes. Yeah. 1981 was the Wildlife Countryside Act that sort of prohibits you going along and digging it up out of the wild, which I'm sure we all don't do that. You can get the landowner's permission to dig snowdrops up. So if you find some in a wood or a field, if you can find the landowner and they give you permission. If it's a site of scientific interest, then you need to have the permission of Scottish Heritage as well. Now, in the 1990s, it actually became illegal to trade in wild snowdrops unless you got a CITES certificate. So people were going over to, like I say, the Crimea, Russia, Ukraine, and bringing back, just digging up snowdrops willy-nilly and bringing them back. So the CITES hopefully put an end to that or controlled it to a large extent. So as I say, that map was sort of slightly out of date. So I got it in around about 2012, just as the 20th snowdrop was confirmed. And then in 2014, along came another one. And then in 2019, along came another one. So it's quite hard to actually get Bursanus because they were only really named and became widely available in Europe just before Brexit. So again, you're involving having to get phytosanitary certificates and import is quite expensive to do that. But the others, some are more readily available than others. I'll run through some of the species, some of the rarer ones. So Nivalis, this is the one that we all know. So the single snowdrop, it's in millions all over the UK. The one on the left there is Flor Pleno, so that's actually just the double version of our common snowdrop. Then in the middle is, it's a common snowdrop double again, but it was a sport, a yellow sport that popped up, I think down in Cheshire, if I remember rightly. And so that's a lovely one. And that's liked by a lot of the visitors to the garden. The only problem is if your soil isn't quite right, you can quite often plant it and then the next year it comes up and it just looks like the common double because it goes back to being green, unfortunately. We grow it here with lots of leaf mould. It's under the canopy of hazel and hornbeam and beech, and it seems to like those conditions and slightly on the acid side. And then over on the right-hand side, we've got an almost completely green Nivalis called Green Tear. There's quite a few of those now. There's ones like Green Mile, which is another really nice green one. But Nivalis seems to lend itself to being extremely variable, and it certainly crosses quite readily with some of the other species as well, which maybe helps to get some unusual ones. But this is by far the most widespread and the most widely grown in people's gardens because it does so well. You know, it does everything you want and it's really reliable, comes back every year. And then another one that was actually for a while was considered to be a Nivalis, but they discovered later on that it isn't, is Regina olgi. Now, unlike most species, it's not actually named after the botanist who found it. It's named after Queen Olga of Greece, who was the grandmother of the Duke of Edinburgh, Prince Philip. So that's where it got its name from. Now, this is unusual in that it flowers in autumn. So instead of being a winter or a spring flowering plant, this will come up. We have our first one in about the 2nd or 3rd week in September, will come up and flower. And this is one of the snowdrops that comes up and just flowers and there's no leaves. And the leaves come along afterwards. But Regina olgi is actually split into 2 different types. And there's a set that flowers after Christmas, and they do the opposite. All the leaves come up first and then the flower comes along. Like I say, it's very similar to Nivalis in how it looks, but it's definitely a distinct species. So one, again, that you might have in your Scottish gardens, it's really, really popular in Scottish gardens. It does extremely well up here, is Plicatus. And it got its name because the edges of the leaves are actually pleated. Quite distinctive. You can't quite see it because this photo is a little bit blurry. But when it pushes up through the ground, the leaves will be folded in on themselves like a concertina. And as they open out, you can see the pleated lines. It also crosses really with Nivalis really easily. And you'll find this in a lot of estates. So when people were going off to the Crimea to fight, a lot of the soldiers were bringing them back because that's the area that this particular snowdrop grows. So there's been quite a few different varieties, like there's a completely green one that's been found at Brechin Castle called Castle Green Dragon. And a lot have been found in that particular castle ground, but it does seem to be one that pops up in a lot of stately homes in Scotland. Then we're going to Gracilis. It's a lovely little snowdrop, and looking at it, you probably wouldn't think it's any different to the others. But if you do look closely at the leaves, it gets its name because the leaves are actually grass-like. They're very thin and fine, and they twist around on themselves. And they also have this unusual markings on the inside where the sinus, the little V slot at the bottom of the inner segments, it doesn't have a complete covering of green. It usually just has two little dots, and it'll have other colours elsewhere. And it also pops up in yellow, like the one on the right-hand side, which is called Ronald Mackenzie. These actually need a little bit more drainage than you'd expect from a snowdrop. As you can see from the soil, there's lots of grit there, and that's what we find. They like plenty of grit and sand digging in when you plant them. And then I won't sort of go through every single species here, but I thought I'd draw your attention to Icori in the picture there. You'll often see this popping up in garden centres and DIY stores in little pots, saying that it's Icori. But be very, very careful because it's most likely that it isn't. It's probably another species called Woronwii, because Icori is actually, it's not completely hardy in Scotland. It comes from the Aegean and it likes its feet to be warm. So if people were growing them as much as the garden centres would have you believe, they'd all be rotting and dying because they don't like it too wet and too cold like in Scotland. But I think what people are actually doing, or what a lot of people in Snowdrop world think they're doing, is they're actually farming Woronwii snowdrops and importing those because they grow so much faster. The leaves are so very, very similar, but Woronwii is actually a lot hardier than Icori. So that's just one thing to watch out when you go into the garden centres. You might not be buying what you think you're buying. Then onto Elwesii. Now, they're generally much bigger than Nivalis. Again, they're the second most commonly grown snowdrop. But where we are up in Aberdeenshire, we're probably just on the border of hardiness for these. I was told by a renowned plantsman that the struggle I was having, because I was getting a lot of them were dying off over winter, especially if it was a really wet winter. And he said, we're probably just on the border of hardiness. And what you'll find is, like in Scotland, all the stately homes and castles quite often grow Plicatus. These are sort of the equivalent for England. So a lot of the stately homes down in England have big, swards of Elwesii growing down there. And the one on the right, again, this is one that's been popping up a lot on the television and in magazines, is Grumpy, which you can obviously tell by the pattern on the inside segments why it's called that. That's a really popular one, and that's the one that we kept losing all the time and kept dying off and rotting on. So now we keep him somewhere under the canopy of plants so that it doesn't get direct rain all the time, and that seems to keep him happy. Then again, a few more species names there. The top one, Alpinus, that's quite a nice one. That grows well in Scotland. It's nice and delicate and a good one to grow in alpine gardens, in fact. And then the one that's highlighted there, Krasnovii, I just particularly like that one because I just love the shape of the flower. It reminds me of the 1970s hippie handkerchief skirts that everyone used to wear. So that's why I like that. It's just so completely different. And the leaves are completely different as well. They're really broad, they're shiny and bright green as opposed to the glaucous ones of Nivalis. Then underneath that, we've got Trojanus, which actually comes from round the city of Troy, as you can imagine. Again, that was thought for a good while to be just another variation of Nivalis until they did some genetic DNA testing on it, and they found that it is actually a completely new species, but it was held at Kew for a while. So it wasn't widely available, but then some were released for sale, and so I managed to get hold of some, and it grows really well in Scotland here. It's a nice plant. Then finally, the last species I'll mention is Woronwai, which I mentioned earlier on, and as you can see, the leaves are very similar to the Icoriacus. They're shiny and they're bright green, but it's a lot hardier and it spreads really quite well. It was actually a Woronwai that sort of hit the headlines first for the high prices. I think it was 2012. It was put up on eBay by the Ian Christie, who discovered it, just as an opening bid of 99p, just to see where it would head. And it ended up at £725. And I think it shocked the owner of the garden, who it's named after, Elizabeth Harrison, as much as it shocked Ian Christie at the time. But this was one of the first ones that sort of hit the headlines. But it's a gorgeous plant, and at the time it was so unique because it was a yellow Woronwai, which you just didn't see anywhere else. And also, again, people were really into the yellows at the time and were sort of greedy for it. Unfortunately, I believe it was bought by Thompson and Morgan, who tried chipping it. So a bit like where you do the twin scaling and things, but they perhaps were a bit overzealous with how much they chipped it, and they managed to kill it, unfortunately. So that was a waste of their money, sadly, but hey ho. But now it's freely available, and you can get it in a lot of places. And it's come down considerably in price, so it's definitely one that if you fancy venturing into snowdrops and getting something a bit different, I definitely recommend that one. So I mentioned earlier some of the natural hybrids that are around and about, and so these form the basis for people who are deliberately breeding them, and you get some really nice, unusual shapes and colours out of these crosses. So again, it's been on the television a lot lately, so you probably do know that snowdrops contain a chemical called galantamine, and it's been found to be very useful in the treatment of early onset Alzheimer's. Unfortunately, as you can see, snowdrop bulbs are generally quite small, so to farm enough snowdrop bulbs to, get enough chemical, it's not really economically viable. So I believe they actually do farm daffodils because they contain the same chemical. Also, as well in snowdrops, you have a natural antifreeze. So you'll quite often go out on a frosty morning or a snowy morning, and the plants are all lying, looking very sad, flat on the ground, and you think, oh no, they're dead. But as soon as the sun comes out and the temperature goes up into positive figures, they just perk back up again and they're quite happy. But one word of caution though, again, I've seen this a lot recently, people putting snowdrops in kokodamas, in little terracotta pots on shelves because they look quite pretty, even in hanging baskets, and they look lovely in all those ideas. But the bother is if it plummets down to maybe -3 or -5 overnight, you will actually kill the snowdrops because there's only so much cold that they will tolerate. If the soil freezes completely solid, the antifreeze, there just isn't enough, and the cells will collapse, and you'll end up with brown mushy bulbs. So a word of caution, if you do have your snowdrops in pots and it's going to be forecast for being cold, just pull them under cover so that they don't freeze solid. So where to grow snowdrops in your garden? Think about where they actually come from. Most snowdrops are on the edges of woodland, so they're growing under the edges of the tree canopy. They're growing under shrubs and rough scrub. So try and copy that in your garden. Now, you may not have a wood or a forest, but you'll generally have maybe a couple of small trees or some shrubs. So yeah, aim for planting them under there. They like a little bit of shade, but not too much. So don't plant them under an evergreen hedge, for instance, and that would be too dark for them. They do like to have sunlight. And the yellow snowdrops in particular, they actually relish the sunshine. They like to get a bit of sunshine on them, and that improves their colour. So quite often if they're grown too shady, they'll go very pale, and they'll sort of go a limey colour rather than bright yellow. But if you get them out in the sunshine, they'll appreciate that. Now, we actually grow, again, we've only got limited hedging and trees, so we actually grow ours in amongst our herbaceous planting. The only bother is we have an awful lot of bank voles and moles. We're out in the countryside. And so what we've devised, or we actually saw somebody using bulb baskets, but they were a bit too expensive to buy en masse. So we buy pond baskets and we plunge these into the border, and it stops the moles and the voles from tipping them out. Because sometimes they tip them onto the surface of the soil and we didn't have a clue which snowdrop was which. So that stops them from doing that. It also has other advantages. Say if we wanted to grow something like gracilis or icori that likes it particularly free draining, we can put extra grit in the soil or extra sand. And also we lift our snowdrops when they're dormant in the summer. You'll often hear that you should, lift and split your snowdrops in the green, which is perfectly fine to do. It's also great if you don't exactly know where your snowdrops are, so you're not going to damage them. The only bother is when you're lifting them when they're in the green, it's just the perfect time for all the pests to be flying, which I'll talk about in a minute. So if you're damaging the foliage and the setting off the smell, which you can't probably pick up, but the pests will, they'll come in and home in them. So we actually keep ours in baskets, and then we can go to we have a map and a list and a spreadsheet of exactly where everything is. We'll go and we'll find that basket, and then we can literally just pull the whole basket up, take it up to the potting shed or up to the greenhouse and tip it out at our leisure. And tidy it up, replant some, and then perhaps put some in pots or put them elsewhere in the garden. And then we can take the whole basket when it's been replanted and just go back and just plunge it back into the hole again. So it just makes life easy for us. It's also a handy thing if you're renting or you're thinking of moving soon. Not just necessarily snowdrops, that you could plant your crocuses or little irises and things into these baskets, and then when you come to move, you can literally go around your borders and just lift the whole thing out and take them with you to your new garden. So I mentioned pests and diseases. This is the one that most people talk about, which is the narcissus bulb fly, which obviously also feeds on narcissus and daffodils. Again, where we are in the northeast of Scotland, we don't get too many of them. And I've certainly never 100% sure I've found one, because they look exactly like a hoverfly and they are a bee mimic. And so we get an awful lot of solitary bees here, the mason bees. So I'm never 100% sure whether I've seen one or not. We've certainly never seen any of the grubs, because what they do is, as the snowdrops are dying down, they will lay the eggs at the top of the bulb. And as the grubs hatch out, they burrow down into the bulb and they'll eat the bulb from the inside out. So the following year, when you think, what happened to that snowdrop, you'll dig it up and all you'll find is a lot of brown husks. Or you may not find anything at all if the centipedes and the slugs have moved in and tidied up all the brown bits. So that's a really soul-destroying one, I think, for when you dig up a plant and it's no longer there anymore. The one that we do know that we have, because I used to take part in the garden moth recording scheme. This is actually one of the moths that we recorded, swift moths. There's a few different varieties, And they have the annoying habit that they will actually lay their eggs on the wing. So they actually have like a scattergun approach to laying their eggs. So they could land absolutely anywhere on any plants. And when they do find, if they land on a host plant that they like, they'll hatch out, and that's the grub that you get at the top left-hand side. So if you find this when you're digging in amongst your borders, this is definitely one to put on the bird table or chuck over the fence into the field or whatever. You don't want this around your plants. What it does, it eats all the roots off, and not just snowdrops. It'll do it to crocuses and other bulbs. It'll also do it to lots of herbaceous plants. Again, with herbaceous plants, the first thing you know is the plant's keeled over, there's no roots. The good thing about snowdrops is if it's looking a little bit sad and you turf it out and you find this underneath, quite often it'll have eaten the roots, but it won't have damaged the bulb. And so you can just keep that bulb dormant for a year and then replant it, and quite often it'll come away again. But yes, that's an annoying one. There's also viruses. You can also get eelworm, but generally with viruses, they're very, very rare in snowdrops. There's not that many been recorded at all. It's certainly not like tulips where they get all the distorted flowers and things. They did think at one point yellow snowdrops were caused by a virus, but they've discounted that and decided that's not the case. One thing you sometimes do have is, especially with the bigger snowdrops like the Alwesii, if it's a particularly wet winter, you can sometimes get botrytis. And the best thing to do is lift the bulbs, strip all the damaged foliage off, and then replant it in completely fresh compost, perhaps with some sand around it, just to keep it like a little bit dry. And hopefully the bulbs will go dormant and they'll just come back the following year. So I thought I'll just go through some of the more unusual ones that we've got in the garden. So this is a nice one, Woozle, who apparently is like a weasel in the Winnie the Pooh series. We also grow heffalump, which is another one in the Winnie Pooh series, but I haven't unfortunately got a photograph of that here. But it's nice because it's nice and small. It's originally a nivalis, I think, but it points sideways. It never falls down. So you get to see the inside and how pretty it is, regardless. You know, it's quite a nice flower for doing that. Another one is, it's one stage on really from Woozle. It's still a double, but all the segments have got confused and have gone really narrow, and some of them have gone a bit tubular. And these are what are known as spiky snowdrops. So they're a bit of a Marmite plant. Some people who come around the garden really like them and think they're fun. And other people really don't like them at all because they're nothing like what you imagine a snowdrop to be. Then we've got another unusual one. This was found in the villager blueberry in the churchyard. And it's just a lovely plant because it completely opens up flat on a sunny day. So you get to see all the insides of the segments. So that's a bit unusual. Then we've got the poplar form that I mentioned earlier on, because we like all our unusual names. So this is one of the most famous ones, EA bowls, and it's quite a large flower. I would say it's not far off the size of sort of a ping pong ball. So it's really nice and blousy. Then you've got the perugiform. This one's South Haze, and it's got lovely green streaks down the outside segments. Again, it does well in Scotland. It doesn't mind the wet weather. Then I mentioned the green ones. So these are all different. They're a mixture of Alwesii, plicatus, nivalis. The one up on the left-hand side is Cowhouse Green, which has probably got one of the palest and least green. And then you go to the middle one, which is Green Mile, which is one of my personal favourites, which I think is actually the greenest of all the green snowdrops at the moment, until somebody breeds it. And then we've got the yellows. We've got Primrose Warburg here and Madeline. Now these are lovely, strong growing yellow snowdrops, so they do well in the garden. Like I say, they do like it to be sunny, and they like plenty of leaf mold in the soil. So they're a nice one to grow as well. And then this is a new trend or a new avenue that breeders are going down, where they're actually changing the white and getting that to be coloured. So you've got a few, there's Anglesey Orange Tip and Anglesey Aurora. And then at the moment, or certainly in our garden, Joy Cozen's is the one that stands out as being the best colour. When it's a bud, it's a deep peachy colour. And when it opens out, it never goes completely white. So if you stand a normal Nivalis flower next to it, which is white, this will always remain sort of a peachy, creamy colour. But again, that's it depends whether you like that kind of thing. And I think a lot of people come into the garden aren't keen on that. They want the snowdrops to be white. This is a favourite of mine. I just think it's a lovely, elegant snowdrop, and I like snowdrops that have got lots of green on the inner segments. And this is, well, it just does everything. It's a lovely snowdrop shape. It's a strong grower. It doesn't smell of pear drops. I think it's named after the shape more than, in fact, I don't think it's got any scent at all, pear drop. Then you've got Sandersea. These originally come from Northumberland. There's a lot of yellows pop up in Northumberland and also in Fife. So I don't know if there's something about the soil on the east coast of Britain, whether it's more conducive to yellows. There's also Norfolk Blonde, which is a yellow. I don't know if that's anything to do, probably more knowledgeable botanists than me would be able to say, but it seems funny that a lot of yellows seem to originate from the east coast. Then you've got Viridipice, which is a green tipped one. About twice the size of a normal Nivalis, and it's a very strong grower as well. So literally, if you put one bulb in, the following year you'll have two, the following year you'll have 4 or 6. It grows incredibly fast. It's a lovely plant. Then we've got Three Ships, which a lot of snowdrops are named after when they actually come into flower. So as you can probably guess, this is in flower at Christmas time. And it's got lovely puckered outer segments, a bit like seersucker fabric. So again, that's quite a nice one to grow. And then we've got Grumpy that we had earlier on. As you can see, this one's a lot paler than the other one, and the eyes have sort of merged. So with most snowdrops, there's a little bit of variation within the cultivar. Then you've got Green Arrow. Again, I like this one just because it's so dark green. It's definitely different, and it generally points sideways rather than pointing down. So again, you get to see it without having to get down on your hands and knees to look underneath it. So my collection, it's sort of, we have it all around the garden. And so that people don't miss any of them, I drew up this map. And as long as you keep to the red line and just keep following it around the house and follow it up to its conclusion, you'll see all of the collection. Because people were missing them, and yeah, it's hard. So I thought the easiest thing is if I get drift off, I can give somebody a map and they know where to go to. So 2021, I was lucky enough to be awarded National Plant Collection. Mine's a horticultural collection, so it's not scientific, but it's basically what I'm looking for is plants that do well in the garden and are good doers, so that you're not going to buy something that's just going to keep disappearing every year. And again, this is another place we house our snowdrops is in a greenhouse. We have the windows and the doors permanently open and the vents open, so it never gets really hot in there. But for some of the species ones, especially that come from the Aegean and around the Mediterranean, just keeps them a little bit drier over winter, but not necessarily warmer, just drier. And also, if we get something new and we only get one bulb of it, we'll quite often trial it in here, so we don't forget about it out in the border, and we get to see exactly that it's the right bulb that we've ordered. Again, that's just the other side with a different range of snowdrops in. And then everything that we grow in the garden, we keep a copy of in these raised beds. And the good thing about these raised beds is you can cram an awful lot in. So each bed's got about 150 varieties in. And we can put this EnviroMesh over the top, so we keep out the swift moths and the narcissus fly and anything else that's going to go in and attack them. It also stops the sparrows from going in and dust bathing in the summer when the compost gets a little bit on the drier side. My husband came up with this idea. We actually removed some steps from up a bank behind the house, and he thought, well, let's just put something back in its place and we'll plant some snowdrops there for some of our visitors who perhaps don't want to get down on their hands and knees and get all muddy, but actually want to see the snowdrops up and close. And so again, we fill these with lots of snowdrops, and you get to see them at a decent height. And also you can compare them close together, so you can see all the different colours and leaf shape. And then everything that we get that we're not happy with, or perhaps we get some rogue seedlings popping up in the border, or perhaps we've bought something and we don't think it's right, we will take it all down into the wildflower meadow and under the trees, and we will plant them under there with the hope that they'll just naturalise and we may get something really unusual pop up one day. We also, at the end of the season, it's quite laborious, we'll maybe take us about 3 or 4 sweeps of the garden. We'll go around and we'll take off all the seed pods from the snowdrops and we'll scatter them down there. We don't want the seed dropping in on the basket in case it's crossed with something else, because it'd be awful the following year to think something's coming up and it's completely different. So again, we started off with, I think, 1,000 snowdrops, and we've got tens of thousands down there now, which is really nice way of naturalizing. And then I see some of you have got your flowers in your vases with you, and this is what we do with them. We bring them in and we put them in the little reed diffuser jars because they're just the right size. And you also get to appreciate the scent, because out in the garden, especially here, it's a bit chilly, it's a bit windy, and you don't necessarily appreciate how much some of them are scented. You've got the famous ones like S. Arnott, that's honey scented, but we found some others that have got really quite powerful scent, like Mrs. McNamara or Sentinel, beautiful scent. Unfortunately, I'm doing a bit of a study this year to see just how many scented snowdrops we've got. And unfortunately, I'm finding an increasing number that smell of TCP. So I'm not so keen on those. And some don't have any scent at all, or as a human, I can't pick it up, but perhaps the bees and other insects can pick it up, but I certainly can't. And then if you fancy doing something a bit arty, you can get these. I line these up along the top of the fireplace. Look quite fun just in a row like that. And then finally, back to the most expensive snowdrop at the moment, is this one that was bred by Joe Sharman amongst Silver Snowdrops. It actually took him 18 years to breed this, and he did the same thing as Ian Christie did. He put it onto eBay and he did a starting bid of 99p, so it would find its own price. He didn't want to put a price on it as such. So this is a new one. It's a perugiform and it's got big yellow splodges on the outers, and it's called Golden Tears. And as you can see, it made a phenomenal amount of money, but he had taken 18 years to breed it, several years to breed it. And then obviously once he'd found something that was noteworthy, then to actually breed it in, or to grow it on in significant numbers that he could actually start selling some of them. So yeah, my garden's open, as a lot of you know, by arrangement for snowdrops. And then in the summer, we do a one-off open day. And the reason we only do it by arrangement is the winter is because we've got limited parking here. In the summer, we've got the benefit of opening the field, and people can come down and have a nice tea and a cake and wander around the pond and things like that. But that's our open days this year. And if you fancy having a look a bit more at what I do, I'm obviously on social media, and also we have a website, And I never, even if we completely sell out of snowdrops, even if we lose the snowdrop out of the collection and I never grow it again, we keep all the details on the website just as a bit of a bank of knowledge of what those snowdrops look like, where they've come from, and things like that. So we also have a blog and a newsletter you can sign up to. So if anybody's interested on finding out more about our snowdrops, that's where to head. But thanks very much for having me.
Oh, Helen, thank you so much. I really hope you were one of the 55 bidders for the Heavens. Was it Heaven's Tears? Is that what
Golden Tears. No, I wasn't. I'm too stingy.
Oh, how disappointing. But still, maybe at £100 for every year that he's been breeding them, that
Yeah,
seems
that's what I thought.
quite an expense for the purchaser. Well, thank you so much for such an interesting and amazing talk on snowdrops. I always learn a lot because I know so little to start with, but I'm hoping that everybody's found that really helpful. And I don't know if anybody's got any question. If you do have a question, because we're such a big audience today, if you can raise your digital hand, which is down at the bottom in it should be in reactions. I think it'll say raise a hand, and click on that, and then I can see you'll move up the screen so that I can see you have raised your hand, because if you just put it up, I might not spot you so easily. So I don't know if anybody has got any questions they'd like to ask Helen in relation to the amazing Galanthus. Oh, Minette, I can see you're waving. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Helen, that was great. Can you tell me what white pen or you use on your labels that doesn't wash off? Because obviously you don't want to lose all your names.
Yeah. Hang on 1 second, because I can't remember the name of it.
Get ready to write it down. They will even sell them, but well, I bought them both from places and I've never had them. It's not. And you wash off with white spirit.
It's
Here we are.
I don't know if you can see it. It's one of these.
Paint marker. First one. Okay, I've got.
Oh, that's all. Just paint marker.
Yeah,
Right.
the airline one. So that.
How long do you reckon it lasts?
Oh, a good 3 or 4 years. The only bother is it's you need acetone or something like that to take it off the labels if you want to reuse the labels, and then and when you write on them again, it never quite lasts as long. It maybe lasts a year after that. But if you don't want to change your labels, yeah, it lasts at least 3 or 4 years, perhaps even longer.
Thanks very much.
Very practical question, Minette. How helpful, because actually that is that's a lot of work, writing labels or losing what it says on them too soon. Anybody else got a question that they would like to ask Helen? Are we all off to go bidding for new ones? Suzanne, would you like to ask something? Go for it.
Hey, Helen, I have a question for you. You talked about one flavor that was an alpine. Do you have any idea, like, to what elevation, and you can do meters, I understand, they can grow, and which ones would be at the higher elevations?
I think about, let me just check. I think it's about 1,500 meters.
Okay.
Because although I think the one that's actually called alpine, there are actually ones that actually grow higher than it. Let me just see.
Or maybe you have a good source. I mean, on your website, maybe, or on another book or something where that would be.
Well, actually, I was just looking. The ones that are totally unpronounceable, like Coen Nianus, that's from the Pontus Mountains in Turkey.
Okay.
And then you've got Angustifolius, which comes from the Caucasus Mountains. So that's sort of across Romania.
Okay.
So, yeah, those probably would be better than, you can certainly get Angustifolius. In fact, you can get both of those quite easily.
Okay. And do you buy the bulbs? Can you buy the bulbs in Scotland?
In fact, there's quite a lot of galanthus growers in the US. In fact, there's, on Facebook, there's I think it's called, can't remember. It's Snowdrops in American Gardens or something like that. It's a snowdrop.
Okay, I'll look. And if
There's
I
lots-
need you, I'll write to you, but I'm very interested. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a
Thank
lot
you.
of growers in the US, so you definitely find them.
Thank you so much. It was a
No
great
problem.
information.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's super. Linda, did you have your hand up? Were you wanting to ask a question as well?
No, it wasn't a question. It was just, if they root their heads, I find if you pick the head and float it in a bowl of water, you can see the inside. And it's a lovely way of having it on a table.
That's a nice idea. Yeah, it's a bit
Just
like
an
when you do
idea of a different way
vegetables.
of seeing
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very nice. What a good idea. I might try that with my very boring, what I think are probably just your standard ones. But
So the double ones are the best.
I
They
bet.
float really well. Yeah.
Thank you. That's a helpful tip for people as another way of displaying them. Anybody else got anything they would like to ask? Ooh, Kathleen, I see you waving at me. You able to unmute yourself?
There we go. I wondered if the collection that Helen has started in Aberdeen, or did she have a collection before she arrived in Scotland?
Yeah, I didn't mention that. I normally do that at the beginning of my talk, but I forgot. When we moved here in 1991, we came from the Wirral, which is quite salty and sandy. And I don't remember that many snowdrops really when growing up. I mean, there perhaps were, and I just didn't notice them. But I was only aware of the common single snowdrop. And then when we were clearing some ground by the house, we came across the midden to the house. And on the top of that was some doubles. And that's what inspired me to go looking. And that was about sort of 1992, 93. And in those days, you didn't have the internet. So it was a case of going in garden magazines and you'd write your order form off and then you send it off with a postal order, if anyone remembers them, or perhaps you'd even send it off with a check written to the value of £10 or whatever. And then eventually about 6 months later, you'd get some snowdrops back. Well, I bought some from Beth Chassow's garden. And I think we bought 3 or 4 at the time. And then when they came, they were so much bigger than the common Nivalis that we had in the garden. And I thought, oh, these are quite different. And one of them was James Backhouse, which has aberrant petals, which basically the petals don't always come from where they should, and you'll get white bits sticking out of the ovary and things like that. And I thought, well, that's really different. And so went back in some more garden magazines and found some more people selling them. And then you get on some mailing lists for some of the nurseries, because again, you had to wait for one particular time in the year when they'd send out their mailing lists, and you'd send off your order form and you weren't 100% sure you were going to get what you ordered. And about 6 months later, you got them. And it was just one of those things. I kept on every year adding more. And then the internet happened, and the internet is really, really bad because you just buy things instantly. So if you like it and you buy it, and and instead of waiting 6 months, it usually arrives the next day, and then you're off again. So, but that's how I've ended. We've got, I think it's 550 is in the actual collection, where I've got them all named at Plant Heritage in their database, Persephone. But we've got about another 50 or so just sort of waiting in the wings, just to see how good they are, because I'm fed up of buying things that don't do well. So now they come and they get their chance, and if they don't do well, I don't get them again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rambling answer, sorry, but there you go.
So really,
There we go. Can
grown
I
in
show you? Yes.
grown in
lovely.
Aberdeen. Oh, Kathleen, that's lovely. You're
Here we
such
go.
a
Here we go.
Stillwater
Here we go.
breathy
That's,
thing.
yes, friend of mine makes a stone, and there we are, the little holes in it for the snowdrops. So pretty.
Oh,
And we
that's
even
fun.
managed to sell them, and we managed to, there we are.
Wonderful.
Yes, there we go.
Good for you. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Helen, they've been grown in Aberdeenshire, but they've come from various different places, depending on your
Yeah.
name.
Well,
And your-
again, before Brexit, I mean, we used to buy regularly from Belgium and Holland, and even Germany. Great galanthophiles and snowdrop enthusiasts over in Europe. So there was a lot of unusual ones coming across. Also Irish snowdrops, some lovely from stately homes in Ireland. That's unfortunately sort of dried up now. It's too expensive generally to import them because of the phytosanitary certificates you need and the import-export. Yeah, so, but hopefully something will get sorted at some point and we might be able to get going again.
Absolutely. Claudia, I think I can see you waving. Are you waving goodbye, or are you wanting to speak? You'll need to unmute yourself if you're wanting to speak. Can you manage?
Okay. So this is something I made last year. It's a little bit past it now because this is just Galanthus nivalis, but it's a kokedama. And they work quite well with snowdrops. I just made it one afternoon when I was fed up because it was raining still. And it's just snowdrop bulbs in a soil ball wrapped up with moss. And I rather like that. That hangs outside our workshop.
Yeah, that's really good. Where'd you keep it over the summer?
I just take it in and put it in the back of the greenhouse, where it's going to be quite cool and dry. And then I plunge it again in the autumn and start it up again and hang it up outside. And then it just, stays okay in the rain because I'm in Scotland too.
Yeah.
And I found that really works. I tried adding other things to it, but they didn't like it very much. But the snowdrops, seem to be okay.
Yeah, they're good. They're tough as old boots, the common nivalis. They are good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that I've only got that and the ordinary doubles and some allusii in the garden, but that worked quite nice. And I think if you haven't got much of a garden, just a windowsill, it's quite a nice way of doing it. Certainly the volunteers that we have that live in tenements, we did this together and they've been rather pleased with them because they just hang them out on the outside of their window on a cup hook.
Brilliant. That's amazing, Claudia. Thank you for sharing that. We are getting some right innovation here for how to display our snowdrops.
Sorry?
We're getting so much innovation for how to display them. It's lovely.
Dodgy signal.
Oh, don't worry. Thank you very much. That's been really lovely.
That's okay.
Anybody else, anything else to add to today's talk and questions? We're all, hopefully, everybody's feeling enthused and will be off on the internet bidding for expensive snowdrops, causing them to go up from 99p and upwards. Liz, did you have anything you wanted to add as we're finishing off?
No, I was enjoying that kokedama there from Claudia. That was lovely. But just thank you very much, Helen. I think it's really lovely. It's been such a nice season of snowdrops, and I've really enjoyed it. I think having worked here for the last few years, I'm really seeing snowdrops now everywhere I go, and it's just such a pleasure. So, and I love all the things you've done on Facebook and on social media, just little comments about snowdrops, and I feel as though you've kind of been teaching me a lot more about them. I mean, who ever knew there was so much to them?
Yeah, no, they're absolutely fascinating, and yeah, you can see why people get hooked on them.
Absolutely, yes. I was thinking I had something really rare, but of course it's not even a snowdrop at all. It's one of the little, is it leucodiums you were saying?
Oh, the leucodium, yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, I thought it's not worth £700, unfortunately.
Maybe not.
But very pretty. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Helen, for your expertise, your knowledge, your entertainment around snowdrops. That's been just a wonderful talk for us to finish. I think that this is the last of our garden clubs this season. So we will not probably meet again until the autumn time, where we will hopefully have some seasonal talks around perhaps apples and other seasonal products leading up to the winter, but before that we have the glory of spring and summer to come. So thank you so much to everybody who has come along to the garden club. Some people have been real regular stalwarts. I've really appreciated it, and it's lovely to have so many from across a wide cross section of Scotland and beyond today. So thank you, Helen, to you, and to everyone else. Have a lovely evening, and we will see you next season. And do keep in touch with us on the newsletter and share your photos and your innovations with how to display your beautiful flowers, because I've learned a lot about floating and hanging snowdrops today. So just lovely. Thank you so much, everybody, and see you soon.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much indeed.
Pleasure, Roseanne. Lovely to have you with us.
There we just had fields and fields